Hey folks, it's Keith Gibbons here with Compact Equipment Magazine. I hope everybody out there is staying healthy, safe, and productive. This is another chapter in our video series called Compact Equipment Conversations, where a lot of us are still working remotely or social distancing in a big way, but we're still taking the opportunity to connect and talk about all the cool machines, technologies, and big issues affecting the construction sector these days. Today we're having a special edition of CE Conversations focused on COVID-19 preparedness. My guest today is Brian Termail, Vice President of Public Affairs and Strategic Initiatives with AGC, or the Associated General Contractors of America. Brian, thank you for chatting with us today.
Oh, Keith, glad to be here. I appreciate your interest and happy to help you.
The Associated General Contractors of America is the biggest trade organization for construction contractors in the U.S. It's also been, in my opinion, one of the best resources for COVID-19 preparedness and safety for contractors. AGC has prepared a variety of great insights and information on its website, agc.org, that ranges from packets to help apply for Paycheck Protection Program loans to comprehensive COVID-19 preparedness plans for construction job sites. AGC has done a variety of great surveys with its membership, which have been shedding a big spotlight on the rapidly evolving construction sector as coronavirus looms. I find myself surfing the site every day for the latest info, and it has once again confirmed the enormous importance of trade associations for me and for our readership. AGC has also launched a great website called workingsafe@agc.org, totally focused on job site safety for contractors. There are a lot of dimensions to this subject, which we can't cover totally in this video interview. But Brian, maybe we could start off discussing the first big step for contractors, developing a COVID-19 preparedness plan and a COVID-19 response team. How have you seen this implemented successfully with your membership?
Yeah, sure. And, you know, I think one of the reasons that we were so successful in convincing federal officials and governors and state legislators and mayors to, in most parts of the country, allow construction to continue is because this industry has got a long and it's got a proven track record in complying with complex safety regulations, right? Like having a safety plan that you need to follow is not new for the construction industry. But what's changed since the coronavirus pandemic is the fact that you've got to introduce new elements to that safety plan. And those involve everything from social distancing to figuring out ways to avoid, multiple contacts or sharing of tools or sort of scheduling of breaks or scheduling workflow so that people aren't overlapping. So the requirements were new, but the process of having to figure out how to protect the workers isn't new for the industry. So, while I think in those first 2 or 3 weeks after the shutdown started, we all saw some anecdotal evidence of too many workers standing together or folks not wearing their masks. By and large, the industry has been able to continue working safe through the pandemic because so many firms have really stepped in and put in place new safety programs. And more important, I think one of the lessons that they're learning is that you can't just have a new safety plan and say, all right, everyone, here's how you have to operate. You have to constantly reinforce it, right? So we had a nationwide safety stand down in early April, but we've been telling our members and anyone in the industry who will listen to us, look, you have to constantly keep standing down for safety. You have to constantly remind the folks on your teams that they've got to follow all the safety procedures. And you have to remember that in this new environment we're in, there's no margin for error because the coronavirus doesn't cut you a pass if you've cut a corner one time. And B, all eyes are on the industry, right? We're one of the only visible segments of the economy operating, at least where we're in most states and still remain that way in many parts of the country. And people are keeping a close eye on our job sites, and they want to make sure that we're protecting our workers and that we're protecting the public. And I think that the transition has been relatively successful. And we've been really impressed with how much the industry has taken to heart that it's got a responsibility to work safe.
Awesome info, Brian. I've been living on the AGC website, so I know there's a ton of different safety protocols that contractors are implementing during this pandemic. You can get a list of 10 pages on some stuff that a lot of folks are doing. But maybe we can go over some of the major ones that stick out in your brain that a lot of these people are implementing.
Sure. Obviously the biggest one is social distancing, right? Construction has long been an industry where people are bunched up together, engaged in a single task. And the biggest challenge has been for our firms to figure out how to be able to successfully socially distance their workers, stay at least 6 feet apart, while continuing to perform duties. Or in the very limited cases where they absolutely can't figure out a workaround, how do you provide workers with the equipment, the mask and the other equipment they need so that they can stay safe while they're in close proximity for a brief period of time? And the real challenge on that is scheduling, both scheduling workflow, so you don't have 5 people in the same room of a job site at the same time, and 2, thinking about scheduling of breaks and shifts even. If you're working on a tall building, you can't have it set up so that you've got 20 people crammed into a 20-person lift on the way up to the 15th floor. You got to keep that capacity about 10-15% on the lift and take longer to get everyone up to a job site. Or breaks. These are construction sites. They're not, high-tech Silicon Valley offices. They don't have wine bars where people can go and take a break during their lunch duty, right? It's a picnic table wedged in next to the dumpster and the porta potties, and you've got to schedule your breaks in a way that you don't have 6 people sitting at a 6-person picnic table eating lunch together, because that undermines everything you're doing on the job site. So we've really had to rethink schedule to maintain social distancing. Other things are hand sanitizing. Not every job site has running water, and yet for a while there, it was really hard to find hand sanitizers that you needed. So firms really had to get creative. They built relationships with local distilleries. They found new ways. They've brought in flatbed trucks and just loaded up water to create running water stations where they otherwise wasn't available, so that everyone could wash their hands and more frequently than they would in the time before pre-coronavirus. And then tool sharing. This is an industry where there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of sharing, and that just doesn't work in the environment of the coronavirus. So we've had to find ways to make sure that if one worker's using a tool, no one else is that day, or if they have to share it, that it's disinfected before that tool is passed along. Same thing, high touch areas, right? Who's making sure that if there's a guardrail that you've got to grab on your way up those construction steps, that we're disinfecting that guardrail on a regular basis frequently. And then the other big challenge is just making sure that workers have masks. We seem to have gotten past the worst of mask shortages, but making sure that every crew had a face covering and could really kind of work safe was another challenge. But so if you drove by a job site today, I think what you'd see that's different is that social distancing, those face masks, those hand sanitizing stations, and that you're not going to see a bunch of people congregated around a single area, either working or on break.
Great insights. The Paycheck Protection Program has been a huge resource for contractors and a lot of businesses all over America. I know that AGC has provided a lot of info and even done some webinars on the subject. How do you feel these PPPs have helped, and what advice would you give our readership about getting them and administering them properly, considering that May 14th is the deadline?
Look, well, we've got a lot of members who have taken advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program loans, right? In our most recent survey, which we put out on May 8th, 80% of our responding firms said that they had applied for and been approved for Paycheck Protection Program loans, and most of them had already received the money. And so we think it's working. If you look at the responses from our members in terms of hiring or letting go, a lot of the job losses that we saw before the program were slowed down or were reversed because those loans were made available. So they've provided a temporary floor on those job losses for our industry, even as demand for construction continues to deteriorate. But we do have some problems with the loan program. One is that in the early days of the loan program, the Small Business Administration, which administers it, changed the requirements from what Congress had set. Congress wrote a bill that made these loans available for firms that employed 500 or fewer people. The SBA, the Small Business Administration, changed those requirements to say 500 or fewer people and had to meet, couldn't exceed a certain dollar volume of work performed, which ended up excluding a lot of construction firms that may not operate on big margins, but when you do a construction project, that's a big dollar fare no matter what kind of work you're doing. So we lost a little bit of time in getting those requirements fixed, and we did ultimately get them fixed. And then really since we started seeing these news stories about the LA Lakers and Shake Shack getting Paycheck Protection Program loans, the administration has almost snatched defeat from the jaws of victory by changing their guidelines for who could qualify for a Paycheck Protection Program loan and really saying that, look, you have to absolutely guarantee that you had no other recourse and that you had no access to a line of credit. But what does that mean? If you're a firm that does public work, you have to have a line of credit just to get bonded, or you'd be in violation of federal procurement rules. But that line of credit may not be something you can access to protect jobs. Frankly, you might have a credit card. And does that count as a line of credit? No, nobody knows. So we've seen 2% of our member firms already return those loans instead of keep them out of fear of these new vague guidelines. And we've got about 18% of firms that tell us that they received a Paycheck Protection Program loan but are considering returning it. And many of them will end up having to lay people off because of these vague new guidelines. And that May 14th deadline is particularly important because that's when the federal government will essentially give you amnesty if you return a loan that you're worried didn't meet their new ever-changing sort of goalposts for receiving the loans in the first place. So it's been a helpful. So the short answer is, Keith, it's been a helpful program, but the federal government has taken a lot of steps to undermine how helpful it could be. And we worry that as these economic lockdowns last longer and the slowdown goes deeper than I think everyone originally anticipated, that these kind of temporary lifelines may not be enough to sustain the industry through the coronavirus and the hardship it's causing.
Most of the states, but not all, consider construction work essential in April, and we're still watching how May develops. As you mentioned, AGC has surveyed its membership quite extensively with great info that I love over the past month plus. How is the market holding up in your opinion, and how are contractors reacting during this unique situation?
Well, about 68% of our members tell us they've had at least one project delayed or canceled. And we've been doing these surveys that you mentioned, Keith, every 2 weeks, basically, of the industry. And each time we do a survey, that even though the overall percentage of projects canceled or delayed has remained the same, the percentage that have been delayed goes down and the percentage that have been canceled goes up. So in other words, we're operating in an environment where many owners, construction owners, have decided that they're not just going to delay a project, they're going to cancel it because there's so much economic uncertainty out there, which if you think about it makes sense. Who's going to build a new hotel or convention center when no one knows when the next convention in America is going to take place? And many state DOTs are getting hammered because no one's driving because they're all ordered to stay at home. And then many city and county governments are seeing far less tax revenue. No one's buying things. No one's going to restaurants. No one's getting their hair done. And that means that's less sales tax collected. So who's going to do the next round of school construction or update their swimming facilities or their park facilities? So the market it's not, it could be a lot worse, I guess, but it's quite quickly deteriorating. We went from an environment where in February we had record levels of demand to an environment at the end of April where we had record levels of layoffs in the construction industry. And so it's a severe downturn, but what's really gut-wrenching is just how fast things have deteriorated. We hope things will stabilize, and as that more states lift some of their economic lockdowns, that you'll see a growth in activity. But short of additional federal support for infrastructure, it's hard to see when the industry will begin a robust recovery.
These are certainly stressful times, and mental health is certainly a safety concern that maybe a lot of folks aren't necessarily thinking about these days. AGC released a great tip sheet called Maintaining a Culture of Care during COVID-19. Maybe you could talk about the importance of mental health on the job site these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, more so than at any point that anyone can remember, we've got a lot of folks coming to job sites that are just filled with anxiety, right? You turn on the nightly news and you see nothing but how we should all be afraid to breathe the air, about worries about economic uncertainty, worries about the health of your family. And they're coming to the job site and they're bringing that stress with them. It's natural. We understand it. And AGC had already been in the midst of releasing this Culture of Care program you talked about, which initially was designed to create more welcoming environment so that firms could continue to diversify their staff. And that's still an important goal. 51% of the workforce in the United States are women, but less than 3% of the craft workforce are women. So we have to find a way to make our job sites more accepting. But we realize that culture of care is even more important, more crucial now, because we've got to create environments where people can can have their stress supported and have their stress understood and sympathized with, even as they continue to operate, because part of having a safe and healthy work environment isn't just physical health and safety, it's mental health and safety. And frankly, that's one of the responsibilities that construction employers need to shoulder, is making sure that their crews are mentally as healthy as they are physically fit.
These are all great insights and information. And if there's really any pro to the situation, it's once again confirmed to me just the enormous importance of trade associations for our readership. Has AGC seen a spike in membership activity or participation during these last few months?
Yeah, first I want to be candid. None of us would have liked to have been in this position, but you're absolutely right. This is one of those break glass in case of emergency moments for the industry. And they're realizing that the glass they need to break, the emergency they need to count on, is trade associations like the Associated General Contractors of America. We've seen record levels of engagement in the last 2 months. We've had, a year's worth of participation in our webinars, a year's worth of involvement in our action alerts to members of Congress and state houses, a year's worth of listenerships and viewerships of our own podcast, our magazine, our newsletters. And that's because I think a lot of construction firms understand that this is why they've contributed their dues to AGC for so long, because they need someone who has their eyes on the entire industry, who has a handle of what's happening in Washington, who understands the broader economic picture and what that means for the industry. And so we are painfully aware of how many challenges our members are facing, and trying to take every possible step to make sure that we can take a bad situation and at least make it as understandable as possible. And we're certainly grateful for all that our members have done to help us be successful on their behalf in the last 2 months.
Great information, Brian. You guys are really setting the bar high. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to Compact Equipment today.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Absolutely. Anything else you guys need, we're always happy to help.
CE readers, you can visit www.compactequip.com for more info on AGC or COVID-19 preparedness. Thanks for tuning in, and be safe out there. Bye for now.